Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to be waiting another minute or two just for a few more people to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to our 9th Alinea Forum and the first virtual instalment of this event. I'm Harvey Stead, a project surveyor at Alinea Consulting and your producer for the evening. And I'll provide you a quick overview of today's session before introducing the presenters and passing over to our expert panel to begin the session. So this 9th instalment of the Alinea Forum will focus on viable offsites, where our expert panel will explore the decision-making process behind adopting offsite delivery, understanding the commitment versus traditional delivery, and ultimately what behaviours and structure needs to be in place for success using this technology. This forum will be chaired by Alex Himes, partner at Alinea Consulting, with the remainder of the panel being made up of Lee Hawkins from Greystar, Jamie Parr from BD Solutions, and Wayne Yeomans from Caledonia Modular. Unfortunately, Jamie's having a little bit of a technical difficulty joining the call, but he's going to carry on joining and hopefully he'll be able to join halfway through. So without further ado, I will now hand you over to Alex to begin the session.
Thank you, Harvey. Hello to everyone who's dialing in, and especially thank you to my 3 guests, or currently 2 guests, for joining me in a discussion which hopefully moves the off-site discussion and conversation on and gives some real insight into successful off-site delivery, certainly from a residential perspective. Those who are dialing in, there is a Q&A function, so hopefully if we get some time at the end, we will we'll answer any questions that you may have, so please do use that function. I'd like to kind of dive straight in and kind of tackle general misconceptions of offsite in the industry that we see today, and I think from my perspective, we'll start with a one that's close to my heart, being a QS. In terms of cost, we hear a lot around kind of faster, better, cheaper, and we get asked a lot about, is it cheaper? And I think the important point to kind of make around that is, when we're talking about cheaper, what are we actually getting at? Are we talking about capital construction cost, or are we talking about kind of overall viability? And in my mind, that's the important point to focus on, overall viability, because I think from a construction cost point of view, taking our experience of it, and if you're going to break it into kind of some key MMC delivery vehicles, so if you looked at CLT, kit apart stroke DFMA, so the likes of Langer Hawk Smart Technology or Mace's HRS system, and then finally volumetric. If you looked in those in those 3 key categories, and from our experience, you've got quite a wide variety in terms of cost versus a traditional delivery. So I'd say CLT probably ranges from a couple of % less than traditional to kind of 6-7% cheaper, certainly from that kind of 150 to 200 unit size scheme with a 15 to 20% or 10 to 15% program saving. The FMA is probably, from what we're seeing, is generally on par with traditional, maybe kind of 2 to 3% more in certain cases, but with again kind of a 10 to 20% program saving. And then volumetric, we've seen anything from probably +5 to +15%, but with a 30 to 40% program saving. So it's not necessarily, in all of those cases, they're not necessarily all cheaper from a capital cost point of view. But we've seen instances of all 3 go through to site, so they're all viable. So I think there needs to be, from my perspective, there's a misconception that capital cost is people are fixated on it being cheaper, and I think we need to kind of move away from that and look at it bigger picture, and I don't think we should shy away from the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be cheaper to get it to site. There are many other factors to consider. So that's my starter for 10. I'll come over to you, Lee. What would you say your kind of the biggest misconception around offsite for you?
So good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by saying that from a Greystar perspective, our primary experience to date has been with high density volumetric modular construction. So, you know, my responses are going to be very focused on that element of MMC. We've delivered 5 buildings today throughout London with circa 10,000 modules installed today across those 5 schemes. And those schemes creating, between a student and a multi-family built to rent product, over 2,000 living units. In addition to what Alex has said there, one of the other biggest misconceptions that we see are protracted pre-construction periods, long lead-ins, large upfront payments, design inflexibility, and quality expectations not being achieved. In our experience, we don't see this, particularly with our modular partner we've been working to date, which we'll no doubt come onto that as we go further through this. But obviously, we do accept the industry has suffered from this based on historical experiences in the past. So I think moving on from that, those that do embark on the journey need to recognise, or should recognise, that in cases there's still a high volume of site work, and our experience with modular, that's typically 50% on site, 50% off site, and we've come round to creating, and I think the industry kind of sees this now, what's called creating a modular mindset to effectively manage the 2 projects in parallel, which requires meticulous planning, organisation to achieve accelerated programs. I think I'm sure Alex will come back to this, but one of the biggest challenges that we had initially was convincing our partners and funders as to the benefits. Why go a modular route compared to what we've all been used to for however many decades, and particularly regarding the strength of supply chain, risk of insolvency, and what would happen in the worst case scenario, and the requirement for an asset to be completed, either taking on the modular supply chain and completing it under your own control with your own investment, or most likely, and where we ended up, completing the scheme via traditional methods. I mean, all of this will require careful exploration, explanation, advocacy to satisfy them, particularly regarding the traditional method, which obviously is not without its challenges. And I think that kind of encapsulates our experience to date, and hopefully gives everyone an indication of those misconceptions, which like I say, we haven't seen. And I'll pass back to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lee. Wayne, I mean, from your perspective, obviously from a modular contractors, I guess you probably experience it a lot more in terms of people's views on your business. So what would you say is the kind of the biggest misconception that you face in trying to kind of sell your product, as it were?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Alex. I think there's still misconceptions on there of performance, durability, people looking back 30, 40, 50 years to what were temporary mobile classrooms in the whole Terrapin days. And I think, the whole, steel containers, site cabins, that can be people's perception when they first think of modular or offsite. And nothing could be further from the truth in terms of, what's actually delivered out there in terms of today's world. I think you look at the modular products supply chain, it's evolved. It's been an evolution, like different versions of a car, for example. So it's evolved into the exceptional products that are out there today that are extremely durable. Concrete floor technology is going into modular solutions now. We're seeing modular structures, going up to the heady heights of 40 plus structures now, 40 plus stories now. We're seeing, key contracts with key clients and supply chain that probably you wouldn't have seen 10 years ago. And I think out there in the marketplace now, there's some exceptional case studies of projects by ourselves and our industry peers that actually show that it is a no compromise solution. And I think each day we try and break down those misconceptions, myths, barriers, and keep pushing forward. But I think the more projects that are built, the more demonstrable case studies are out there for people to go and walk around, walk up to, touch, feel, and try before you buy. So yeah, it's all the typical ones that Lee mentioned as well. So yeah, that's from our point of view, Alex.
Thanks for that, Wayne. I mean, just touching, I think Jamie's still having IT problems at the moment, but I mean, just touching on some of the points that the guys said there, and I think two of the key ones, as well as cost, that we always get asked, the funding part of it, and we'll come on to procurement later, but I think there's a kind of general misconception that there's a big upfront payment when it comes to offsite volumetric, and that's not our experience, and I'm sure it's not your guys' experience either. So I think that's something that people have always asked, and it's not true. There doesn't have to be a big upfront payment. It's managed in a very similar way to traditional and the way that you would deal with offsite payments. So I think that's one definitely to kind of reinforce for me, and also the quality piece. I'm not saying everyone is at the same quality level, but when you look at the finished products that we've seen at Greenford, and I'm sure some of your sites as well, Wayne, that there is no drop off in quality of the finished product compared to a traditional product. And I think that's key, because the point you were making around people's views of where they saw modular maybe 20, 30 years ago, and an image of prefab in their mind, we're not there anymore. So I think they are the ones worth reinforcing from those points, because they're ones that always come up. And I think, Lee, I mean, Greystar as a company who've really embraced offsite, certainly volumetric, and a company always kind of looking to challenge the way things have always been done. I mean, we touched on kind of the program aspect of volumetric, but in terms of getting kind of your own business case and investors over the line, what were the other kind of key considerations that you had in kind of shifting from a traditional delivery to an offsite volumetric delivery?
I think particularly as it relates to our product, built to rent product, ultimately, speed of delivery is key to us, and that investment kind of life cycle, particularly regarding the construction costs, is important. I think ultimately that played into it, but like I said, the real challenge was initially getting them across the line with the maturity of the supply chain, which I know has improved in recent years. I'm sure we'll come on to that, but that was probably our biggest challenge, and like Wayne has said, the quality expectation, and getting that quality right first time and being able to control that is key. And like I say, we'll no doubt come onto it later on with further questions. The benefit of an early fixed price position. Certainly, we've experienced that on each and every one of our projects with our modular partner.
Thanks, Lee. Wayne, I mean, your kind of appointment via PCSA with Canary Wharf on Wood Wharf was seen as kind of a real fillip for the industry. It was great to see the kind of Caledonian kind of re-enter the residential and high-rise residential market. So I think that's been great for the offsite world. I mean, could you give us a little bit more? I mean, how did that come about, and a bit of insight in terms of how that was procured and where you kind of currently sit with that? Because it's certainly a project that's kind of captured people's imagination from certainly in an offsite world.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Alex. I think where we are at the moment is, the clients opted to go down the modular route. They have a fairly difficult site that will be difficult to service, via traditional build, as far as accessibility, getting lots of individual trades in there. It's a very small footprint of a site for quite a high build. And overall, there was program and certainly quality demands. We're looking at 5-star accommodation both for the apartments and the hotel element of it as well. So that consideration is twofold. You want to get the building built, but it's got to be down to an exceptionally high quality as well. Why did they choose us? The client went to the market. It wasn't a negotiated project. It wasn't a shoe-in for us in any sense. It was we had to bid for the scheme and demonstrate that our capabilities were stronger than the competition in that sense. I think what helped the process and helped them to come down a modular route and come to ourselves was we invested a lot in the project at a very early stage in terms of our time, our technical information, our support to the client and their respective design team as well, really to build up that real robust case. So teams like yourselves, Alex, could go back to clients like Lee and say, OK, we've done our due diligence, we've got all the background information, we know the scheme works, we've got all this information here. It's not just a team saying, yes, we can build that and then worry about it later. We actually do a lot of work up front, which is sometimes not seen because it's behind the scenes. But our pre-con team work well with client teams at a very early stage, and that's what we believe gave us the edge at that early stage and gave the client sufficient confidence to move forward with a modular solution in that sense. If we look at the project drivers and the challenges around the actual scheme itself, obviously we've mentioned about quality and delivery time. That's was key to the client. Reducing what was forecast to be their traditional timeline, bringing it back inside of their wish list in terms of parameters of delivery timescales, but without that compromise on quality. What we've actually delivered for the client is a quality sample and a quality standard. So not only did we have a complete office suite of samples for the client to come around and have a look at, but we actually built a sample apartment that the client then could check the quality of the finish, the quality of the fit out, the standard of the build, look at all the fire compartmentation, or look at all the fire details, all the technical information that the client would want to sign off and say, yes, I am happy with that. And that's now actually moved down to site as well. So that actually sits on site now. So the client's got a visual aspect which they can use for marketing, but also they've got a product there now that's constantly going to be used as that quality mark against all of the build that gets delivered into that site as modules turn up there. That's not what you don't get that with a traditional build in that sense, that you can constantly have a benchmark right next to you of a finished article. You can have a marketing suite that's very glam, but it's not the actual building itself. We've actually got an actual full building as it's going to be built sitting there on site now. What's also helped with the modular construction as well is it's in a very condensed area, so a very high density area within Canary Wharf. So obviously the client was very conscious of disruption to adjacent buildings and their tenants. So that was a big key consideration, based on limiting the amount of transport in there. On average, we've got probably somewhere in the region of about 40 to 50% less tradespeople on one of our construction sites. So obviously when we look at, contractor parking and the general disruption to local road networks by having lots of vehicles in and out every day, obviously, an off-site solution like ourselves helps to reduce that. And this was one of the first major schemes for the client, one of their big major steps in going for a modular off-site solution as well. So it's been watched very closely. The client's obviously got the ability to come to our factory, once a day, once a week, once a month, as many times as they want, and see the process go through and see their building develop as well. So that just really hones in on the quality aspect of the build as well. And it's not something that you get when you buy a car. You can't go to the factory and watch your car go through unless you're going to buy a very expensive one. But at least now in that sense, the client can come and see their building develop. So they can constantly, scrutinise that whole quality aspects of it, which means that, we have to deliver on what we say.
Thanks, Wayne. Some really good points there, and I think some of the the ones that are really current event. So in terms of less people on site, less deliveries from a sustainability and the kind of the current COVID world that we find ourselves in. We've seen kind of in the press from a number of your, including yourselves, competitors in terms of ability to carry on delivering at almost maximum capacity through this period. So that's, I mean, we won't go too far down that route at the moment in terms of discussing COVID, because I think everyone's probably kind of sick to death of hearing about it. But it's certainly a real key point, and hopefully we'll kind of accelerate some more clients looking into that.
Yeah.
I guess the one question I had: what design stage did Canary Wharf Group come out to? What stage did they tender? Because that's one that we always get asked about. Do you need a modular contractor on from stage 0, or when's the best time to get them on? And we can touch on that on procurement. But what was Canary Wharf's strategy?
For us, they came on board probably round about REBA stage 1, just probably getting ready to go into 2. So there was an idea of a floor plan that was developed around, in essence, around a traditional build originally, and we worked with the structures team and the architectural teams to create that modular grid and help the client understand how that grid would work. We always say the earlier that we can get involved, the better, and we can then bring forward a good commercially and viable solution along with the best possible program. The way we look at it, every module that comes to site is a crane lift. So the lesser amount of modules that we can deliver on a solution, then obviously the more optimal the delivery period is going to be. But I think that key design aspect is working with a team that understands the process of setting out a modular grid within a build and getting an efficient one that's still sympathetic to clients like Lee in terms of their floor plans, their apartment sizes, their pattern book, shall we say, as information. So we have to work around those parameters and make sure we're bringing forward an efficient solution. No one solution fits all. But the earlier we can get involved, we always say if you're starting from first principles, if you can design a building from first principles around an offsite solution, it's far easier to convert that back to a traditional build if that's what the client wants than converting a traditional build into an offsite one. There's a lot more synergy in setting out if you've started on first principles to look at offsite. So that's what we'd always say: earlier the better.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, agreed. I guess when it comes to, it leads on very nicely to the whole procurement angle, because to date, we've looked at it a number of ways in terms of getting people involved early. We've probably experienced where we've potentially gone too far down the traditional route and then tried to kind of backwards mask into modular and the lessons that we've learned from that. But I guess there seems to be no real kind of overarching strategy for kind of offsite procurement, because you've got one side of the fence saying that unless you've got a fully kind of a full delivery vehicle such as yourselves, where you can do the traditional and the modular, who can put a wrap on it, that tends to be the favoured solution for most residential developers. Whereas you would think that something more of a CM approach, where the kind of the smaller volumetric and offsite companies could kind of marry in with a larger contractor, would work better to kind of enable more people to come in. So I don't know what your views on that, and I guess it comes back to the point that Lee made at the beginning around the amount of competition that exists, because in a way that almost hampers your own progression, because people they see it as a negotiated route only.
Yeah. I think the way we've looked at it, and certainly the way we've seen it in the past is, we moved into adopting the principal contractor route, offering that full turnkey solution on the basis of being able to give the clients best value, and best value in terms of cost, program, commitment, responsibility. I think what in the past historically, where we've been a specialist subcontractor to a main contractor, the ultimate client has paid a sum to have us on that site. So tier ones are not known for doing anything for nothing. So there's going to be a markup on our scope, and on some projects we can be doing 80% of the work, and the client's still paying for that privilege. So we can demonstrate quite clearly that we can offer a better value by doing a full turnkey solution. I think there's so many design coordination matters that need to be done, and to design a scheme as detailed as some of Lee's projects, for example, there's a lot of intricacies around the shapeology, the typology of the design, the connections, integrated MEP into all these buildings. Those challenges are design intensive enough without then splitting down packages and hoping that it's all going to come back together and hope that everybody's coordinated their design packages at work suitably enough. So we see a lot of advantages in doing that, and probably 90% of the projects we deliver today are as principal contractor, and there's some real good demonstrable case studies out there that have shown the benefits by wrapping it all up in a complete wrap, as use your analogy there, Alex.
Lee, well, I mean, just coming on to you. I mean, obviously we've looked at it a couple of different ways on Greenfield in terms of at which stage we kind of go into whether it's a PCSA and what's your view in terms of going forward? Where do you see the kind of the challenges of procurement and the best route to deliver it? Right? He's on mute.
Sorry. So with just to recap on where we've been and what we've been talking about, particularly the design point. Our journey started 5 years ago with these circa 2,000 units that we've been talking about, 5 projects, and I think our design has evolved, and colleagues have worked hard to develop a design in-house that can flip either way, be it traditional or modular, and we've worked very closely with our modular contractor to achieve that. So I think that kind of led us down the negotiated partnering approach from the outset. So I think we've experienced that, and that's been a benefit to us ultimately, but really driven by probably the 5 years ago when we started this, the lack of competition in the marketplace to be able to deliver a 250 plus unit scheme, and where we felt the marketplace was with regard to everything we discussed regarding cost fixity at an early stage, design flexibility, quality, achieving the quality expectation, being able to hand the building over as we want it handed over, because that's one thing. Another thing we need to add to this discussion is the benefit of modular, to be able to get a phased handover, a 2 or 3 phase handover depending on the number of calls in the building. So I think our experience has led us to the point where this partnered approach has been a benefit to us. But I think our hope is that increased competition in the market will obviously afford that better degree of competition, and whereby we hope more cost-effective proposals can be, that competition will hopefully drive more economic proposals for us down the line.
I guess the question to both of you really, I mean, and it follows on from that, is how much do you think standardization will play a role in enabling more people to kind of come into the industry? Obviously, there's lots of other factors and hurdles that they need to overcome, but I think for me, standardization, even when you look at traditional, that enables a rational cost. We've looked at in previous guises, looking at future housing studies that had kind of a regularized grid. And in trying to align that, surely that's going to make it easier to tender and kind of put off that the kind of stigma that it's a negotiated route only. So I guess come to Wayne on that one first.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, we always say standardisation is key, but I think it's standardisation with a bespoke element, which is a bit of a crazy way of trying to put it. But I think we're conscious that we don't develop ourselves. We're working for clients such as a developer like Lee's business. We have to look at that aspect in terms of we can mix and match sizes of modules within developments, because we know that that, you know, one size doesn't fit all, and it doesn't. We need to have that varying approach. I think the standardization is all around the chassis design for us. So simple factors of just like stacking areas on top of each other. So trying to keep all your studios together and your 1 beds and your 2 beds, and using that more of a standardization where we can get that really efficient chassis frame of the design, which is the key fundamental element to it, and bringing that in terms of standardization. So we could have, you know, on a big block, we could have 10 different types or 10 different sizes of modules, or 15 or 20 sizes. But if there's 600 modules on there, then that's a small price to pay to make sure we can be sympathetic to the client's designs as well. So there's definitely a give or take, but standardization to us is key around that chassis, and then we can adopt to more of a bespoke. We haven't got a production car where you can only have size A on Monday and size B on Tuesday and size C on Wednesday. That wouldn't never really work when we've never built 2 buildings the same in the sense of the style and the look and feel of it. So we need to offer a bespoke approach and then standardize the elements in terms of connections and details that we can bring forward time and time again.
Thanks, Wayne. I think that the key point for me picking up on that is that, and it probably comes back to almost a misconception, is that people have a view of volumetric, that the box is the box almost, and that you're just producing boxes of a standard size and type, and they're not flexible around clients' demands. And yes, there are constraints, but every building has got design constraints. Every site has, so it's no different. It's a set of rules, and it's just a different set of rules than traditional, but there are a lot of synergies. Good efficient design is good efficient design. So what's your view on standardization, Lee?
Yeah, I think you know, we touched on this time and time again, haven't we? I think you know, every developer such as us, you know, we want to achieve a standout product, and I think, you know, if the industry starts saying, you know, unit layouts need to be X when we want them to be Y, then, you know, there's going to be challenges. I think it will boil down to elements within, as Wayne's pointed out, that, you know, there'll be more standardization of the elements that make up the overall modules, or the MMC approach that's taken, you know, within the buildings. You know, clearly a lot of work being done looking at, you know, prefabricated wall systems and increased MEP system modularization. But I think, you know, specifically as it relates to, you know, the experiences we've had with volumetric modular, and obviously, you know, Wayne's business, it'll be those elements within the modules that, you know, maybe there's less traditional, you know, fitting out of the modules, and, you know, there's sort of plug and play elements that are fitted within those modules. And also, you know, as I pointed out earlier on, you know, 50% of the work is on site, and to date, you know, that's all reinforced concrete. Ultimately, reinforced concrete transfer structure, reinforced concrete cores, and maybe, you know, there's opportunity there to look at prefabricating those elements, standardizing those elements, and with, you know, hopefully deriving, you know, further program advantage in doing so.
One of the, I guess something that gets posed quite a bit is and talked about is for Offsite to be successful is for it to have almost a fully vertically integrated solution. So something like Berkeley Homes have now got their modular factory set up. They obviously control supply as well, because they've got quite a strong pipeline availability of sites. We've seen L&G kind of go down the fully vertically integrated route. And I guess is that the only real way for people, like for serial developers, to get in? Because I think there's a view that volumetric isn't something for a one-off speculative project. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do agree with the fact that it's a collaborative process. So probably one-off projects may not kind of garner the understanding between the two parties. So I mean, I don't know what your views around vertical integration, and whether you think that there'll be more of that, or whether there's another way of doing things without having to look at it as a kind of a full all singing all dancing version of modular.
I think, you know, if I can jump on that one to start off with, Alex, I think, you know, it's all about partnering. It's all about collaboration, as you mentioned. You know, to set up a facility like we have is no small feat, as probably Barclay will tell you, setting up theirs. And, you know, we've got, you know, sufficient capacity to meet the demands of the marketplace, and not just us, but there's a lot of businesses out there in the industry as well that can, you know, that can offer solutions out there. The way we see it, you know, is you know, true partnering, true collaboration, you know, sharing the wins, sharing the pain, sharing the gains in all that sense. And a contract that works around that, you know, developing a development plot from grassroots and building that together enables that fully integrated solution. And it's, you know, we can be that contractor of choice in that sense, and work with a good, strong client developer that we can take, you know, we can take that problem of that build away and develop it, but we're developing as a partnering agreement rather than just, you know, client and supplier, you know, and then the two get disconnected. It really is getting that true JV that we feel can work quite well.
Lee, what's your views on vertical integration, and would Greystar ever consider buying a factory? Or
I mean, just before we come on to that, and just supporting everything that Wayne has just said, that I think ultimately it will boil down to, you know, that partner and negotiated approach with, you know, with a degree of maybe earlier competition to get to that point, maybe, you know, earlier in the design stage 1, stage 2, potentially. But you know, from our perspective, we're excited and looking forward to there being more competition in the marketplace, particularly in, you know, on the volumetric modular front. You know, conversations we've had before, Alex, you know, that everyone, but, you know, certainly in our position would have toyed with the idea of, is it the right thing to do to control our destiny by investing in a factory? But I think ultimately, when it boils down and you look at the fundamentals, you know, it opens up the huge challenges with respect to that investment, that, you know, return on that investment, and ultimately being able to control your pipeline to be able to guarantee doing, you know, someone like Barclay Homes clearly in a position to be able to do that much easier than a lot of housing developers. So you know, just to reiterate, I think, you know, we're quite happy, you know, confident that, you know, our way of negotiating, partnering, and based on the, you know, the fact that the skill basis that, you know, Greystar has got in house to be able to manage that effectively to the benefit of all parties, you know, that's our kind of preferred route to, you know, to take it as things stand at the moment.
Thanks both. I mean, I think that it kind of leads on to the next point on collaboration, because I think you both touched on it in your answers there, and I think, Wayne, you've probably experienced it as a company where you're working in the public sector, where there's a lot more like frameworks are set up really well, and the kind of spread of work amongst available and suitable companies is a lot fairer. Do you think there's a lot that can be learned in the private sector in terms of how modular is delivered in that way? Because we've seen it successfully done in traditional, where certain developers have got a pool of traditional contractors that they use and share the work fairly. And do you see that as maybe being something that could unlock further collaboration between client and contractor?
Yeah, I do for sure, Alex. You know, if we can use an example, you know, the Department for Education, you know, we sit on block 1 on the MMC1 framework. You know, that was a framework that was tendered by 23 contractors or more in terms of tier 1s and ones from the modular market as well, and a lot of JVs and collaborations when in there bidding that. I think that shows that there's strands of businesses out there that can give that interest to what offsite means, or modern methods of construction, and MMC is not just limited to volumetric, albeit we're talking about volumetric at the moment, but there's lots of strands of what MMC actually means in terms of, you know, from panelized to volumetric solutions. I think that MMC framework has been set up extremely well from all bidding on a standardized design, and then the client selecting, you know, a batch of 5 contractors that they feel can offer the right benefit to that particular client base. I think that framework could be repeated across the private sector as well. So, you know, a developer such as Lee could do the same principle, and, you know, get one of their plots tendered on a basis, and then get a pool of framework supply chain on there that could deliver out those plots for Lee then, and then that due diligence is done in terms of the procurement process. Understand cost, understand the deliverables, understand the scope, and then that would help, and it could be a repeatable model. But all we can say is that the MMC1 framework for the DfE is working extremely well, and it's allowing that's allowing a lot of fluidity on their pipe work. It's allowing a lot of projects to come in and out and change around, but it's giving them a certainty of supply, a certainty of cost, a certainty of program delivery, which is obviously all helping with the huge program that they've got. So yeah, I think that would be a good benchmark to use.
Lee, I guess phrased slightly differently. I mean, what would you to kind of stimulate collaboration between client and contractor? What more would you like to see beyond having more competition? What else do you think would promote more collaboration in terms of getting clients more involved with offsite?
I mean, ultimately, it's, you know, by, you know, demonstrating and advertising the benefits. You know, positive experiences are going to, you know, encourage further uptake. You know, I think the industry as a whole is doing the best it can do, you know, currently under difficult circumstances to advertise and promote the benefits of building offsite and MMC, and those advocating organisations should continue to do so. I think, you know, often it becomes a bit disjointed, and often there are fits and starts, but, you know, from our perspective, you know, we're a huge advocate of that method of delivery, and hopefully, you know, people will. Well, certainly, you know, we can see that, you know, there's been greater uptake now, and hopefully people will take the benefits of the experience that we've got, and you know, the great story that we can tell about it. But I think, you know, it's boils down to, you know, exhibiting these historically important, you know, behaviours and process, you know, particularly regarding early engagement, understanding each other's priorities, you know, transparency, you know, throughout the whole process, particularly as it relates, you know, ultimately it boils down to, you know, pricing levels and that level of transparency, and then, you know, quality program and everything else that comes forthwith.
I guess a point that you mentioned earlier, which kind of gets back to the kind of crux of it, of where we are with offsite, is the kind of general education of the industry, because I think we're trying in this conversation to kind of move on from lots of presentations that we've all given, looking at the benefits that are kind of widely reported in terms of program time and sustainability, but it still feels that there's the journey to be had there, because that's why you kind of keep getting asked the same questions. I think from my perspective, that kind of sharing of information across all parties is what's going to unlock it, the actual case studies. And I mean, to be fair, there hasn't to date been that many that people can latch onto in the recent past, but I think certainly from both of your perspectives, like sharing the success stories that you're kind of currently going through, I think it is a big vehicle to kind of unlock more people exploring it, because I still think that there is, and I'm sure you share that opinion, that there's still a lot of learning for people to do in the industry to understand what the real drivers and how to unlock those blockers. So yeah, I think that collaboration piece will only be led by people willing to share what they've learnt, because if you don't, everyone just kind of gets siloed, and everyone's kind of there's a lot of industry noise around certain things, and if you listen to every conversation, it's not necessarily helpful without actually going and speaking to people who've lived and breathed it and have actually delivered it. So I think that for me is really important. And I think another real lesson learnt, and I'll come to you, Lee, lessons that we've probably learnt on Greenford, just to give people a bit of an understanding, what are the different structures and behaviours that are needed in place for modular to work versus traditional, because there were certainly ones that we came up against that we probably didn't consider at the start, like certainly when we started on the journey?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on this before, but just add a bit more detail to it. There are numerous people now called it, trying to manage this and having a modular mindset, but noting that in my mind that would be applicable to managing any degree of MMC, whatever quantity was taken on. There's always going to be an on-site and an off-site element of that, and often they're running in parallel. So the key to us is organising yourself, and it takes meticulous planning, and we know that from experience, to manage those two projects in parallel, particularly from the outset, when the on-site element's progressing ultimately as quickly as it can to be able to deliver the structure that then needs to support the modules that are landing on site 5 months later. And once that clock's ticking, there's those modules that they need to come to site and they need to land on the frame. So the speed of design and decision making is key for it to be successful, like I say, particularly in the delivery phase, and setting up the team, particularly on a client side, to be able to run those two in parallel track, making sure the site team are governing what the contractor's doing on site, making sure that the off-site team are doing what they need to do, and from our perspective, making sure that the contract requirements are ticked from a quality perspective, and the contractors meeting the program. And from our perspective, I think one of the key lessons there was managing change control. And albeit we've as you and I know, Alex, we've had varied experiences of when we make changes and when we shouldn't be making them. But clearly we need to learn that value changes ideally should be considered long before the contract is signed. But like I say, we've had good experiences of our contractor being able to accommodate that, but that comes with a health warning. So I think for everyone out there considering it, it puts the much more pressure front end on the design to make the right decisions at the right time, to allow that two project process to play out as it needs to play out without worrying about things having to change at the 11th hour.
Yeah, I think that for me, that change control is a really interesting one, because it's something that's always reported that yes, late change is going to cost more if things are already going through the factory. Late change costs more in whether it's traditional or not. But so there's that obvious behaviour, but then the bit that's kind of intrinsically linked to that is just the speed of turnaround of change. So even when you're instructing change and status in drawings and looking at reviewing cost for change, everything is condensed. So, and it sounds obvious to say, but when you're actually in it and you've got a contract set up and it's still technically a traditional contract, it's those time periods that you normally allow yourself to go through change control just don't work. So I think that to me is a really interesting one. And we've had a question in around form of contract, which is quite pertinent actually, because we're still seeing kind of design and build used as a vehicle for delivering off-site projects, and I guess because of the element of off-site, it's whether that is still applicable. And the question was actually, I mean, what form of contract, Wayne, on of Canary Wharf, or will they adopt? And is it design and build?
Yeah, it is, and we will be working under an NEC form of contract on there, but we work under NEC, we work under JCT. It's that the form of contract there is quite simple, but as Lee mentioned, it's adopting all the change control aspect of it. Working with an off-site solution is, the design is far more intensive up front, and changes can happen. We're not saying it's a fixed and rigid answer. But changes can happen and be adopted all the way through. But when we're working with the digital world now and digital models and true collaboration throughout the design teams, we should be able to get a good finite solution there at a really early stage, which will help the whole process and cost plans going forward. And I think it's just being able to have that collaborative design team together and to work together hard up front, which will mitigate those issues.
Thanks for that, Wayne. Just picking up on a couple of other questions. I mean, there's a couple that kind of focus around future flexibility of modular, because that's another one that gets posed in terms of what's the operability of kind of switching modular around later. I mean, like from my perspective, you rarely see traditional builds, like residential builds in that life cycle, get fundamentally rejigged. They may have a look at another use class, or they may be fitted out differently, but the kind of full-on remodeling you rarely see in my perspective. But in terms of volumetric, from a fit-out perspective, there is still the ability to kind of reinvigorate a product later in the line, which I guess is pertinent to someone like Greystar, who would want to, certainly in the States, they kind of recycle their multi-family stock to keep up with what is a kind of a huge market out there. So what's your view, Wayne, in terms of future flexibility around offsite and volumetric?
I think there's two aspects to it, and there's two versions of a module. There's a line loaded system and there's a point loaded system. A line loaded system you typically use, say, for a hotel room or a student accommodation room, when it's probably always going to have that kind of use. Yes, it may be refit every now and again, but it's always probably going to serve that purpose as one of those two. And a student room could be a budget hotel room and all that kind of thing, depending on where the buildings were. I think we tend to adopt on apartment schemes more of a point loaded approach, which gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of we've got a structure with a series of beams and columns, but then effectively the internal walls become non-load bearing in that sense, which means that the structure's key and the structure's set and the structure's fixed, but internal layouts, opening rooms between others, then become a little bit more easier to do. So a room can be opened up or can be combined going forward, or to create that more open plan look and feel to a building. We opt for a point loaded system on a school, for example, where teaching bases may change going forward and classroom sizes may increase or decrease. And that open plan nature of that build allows that building to have future flexibility. It might not be a school in the future, so it could have that So it's adopting for us to understand the client drivers, understand what the potential future aspects might be for that building, the future use, and then seeing how we can future-proof that structure. But it comes in connection with that actual structural design we choose from day one, really.
Thanks for that, Wayne. I guess trying to sum up and look towards the future, what we see, and we've talked a couple of times about one of the real constraints is competition and whether that manifests itself in pricing or the ability to tender. And it's obviously, as you well know, quite an undertaking for someone to decide to build a factory, and it's not to be taken lightly. So where do you see the kind of, I see that as the biggest challenge, and where do you see the kind of opportunity to overcome that? Do you think that a government intervention in terms of stimulus, in the same way that the public sector benefits from that, do you think that from a housing association point of view, or government to potentially go back and start building council houses again, do you think that kind of investment is needed to really push things on?
I think investment's always good, as long as it comes from the right areas and it's used wisely. We've seen a lot of investment that's come into the industry not be used wisely, and that's where it can have an adverse effect. But pipeline is always the key factor around anything to do with a factory-based process. So having that key pipeline of work it allows businesses to invest in themselves, but also promote interest from further afield and financiers to support businesses grow and to introduce new players coming in. I think going back to some of our early comments about more simplified models, simpler procurement rules, all of those things then would hopefully stimulate more pipeline, would stimulate more growth in the industry, and allow people to invest in businesses like ourselves and to grow. You know, competition shouldn't be feared. It should be grabbed hold of, and you know, it keeps everybody true and on their toes. But pipeline is the biggest stimulus to all of it, really. And yeah, if businesses can see the pipeline, then you know there's people there willing to invest to support them and help them grow.
Lee, where do you see the off-site world going? Would you think that is volumetric the panacea of all, or do you see more hybridized structures potentially being the real growth area of off-site?
Yeah, we touched on it before. You know, volumetric modulars certainly in the mix, and what proportion of the marketplace that takes up. You know, time will tell, particularly with increased competition. But I think ultimately it comes back to, you know, the industry doing everything in a better way and looking at a better approach across all the building elements. But I think, you know, from the point of view of greater uptake, whether it be private or public sector, for me it's about, you know, end users engaging, collaboratively working more to support the industry. You know, competition's clearly going to be a benefit to everyone, but provided that, you know, the industry can deliver what owners want, whatever the tenure of the particular asset is. You know, we touched on the partnering negotiation approach to, you know, in our mind, you know, that certainly provides, you know, the value that's required. And pooling of potential partners and agreeing terms, you know, like Wayne says, you know, it's going to require pipeline, but also the right behaviours, both, you know, within the supplier and you know, the owners need to reciprocate.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bo. Unfortunately, we've run out of time there, so lots of good questions still coming in, and it's certainly a topic that we could go on and on. There's a lot of potential to kind of delve even deeper into that. So thanks everyone for dialing in. Apologies that we didn't manage to get Jamie on the call, but maybe we can try and pick up some of the queries via social media as well, the questions that have come in. So I'd like just to thank Lee and Wayne for joining me. Hopefully everyone's found that a useful session and kind of opening people's eyes to people who are actually out there doing it and posing some more deeper questions around offsite and hopefully getting involved themselves with offsite. So thanks everyone for dialing in. And before we leave, I'll just hand back to Harvey, who's going to introduce our next alinea forum that's coming up later in the month. So thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, Alex, and for the rest of the panel for that really interesting discussion and debate on viable offsite. That was really good, and I hope all the attendees who managed to log in found that insightful as well. So following this live event, we will actually be sharing the live recording of this. So for those that missed it, or those who want to pick up on a couple of the points, you'll be able to do that just by watching that again. So we'll be sharing that. And yeah, finally, as this event is part of a series, our next virtual linear forum, and actually our 10th event, will be held in 2 weeks' time on the 23rd of July, and will be focused on net zero carbon. So here the expert panel will delve into the details of what net zero carbon actually means, how it's measured, and what we can actually do kind of within some of these guidelines. So we'll be issuing out invites for that shortly, so please keep your eyes peeled for that, and we hope to see you there. But yeah, once again, thank you everyone for joining, thank you to the panel, and have a great evening. Thanks everyone.
Cheers.